Hello there, we are the Star Wars guys. I am Master Paul,
And I am Mando on fire.
and welcome to our YouTube channel, and welcome to the finale of our series of reviewing every single Star Wars movie that has come out. Of course, we are talking about The Rise of Skywalker. And just like with the other reviews, we will be giving you two different perspectives on this movie, what we thought of it the first time we had seen it, and what we think of it now. So make sure to hit like and subscribe, and wasting no more time, let's get into it. So, we sort of saw this movie about the same time as each other. You saw it the first time when I took you to take it, and then I
Yes.
saw it a couple days before that with some of our coworkers from our current job.
Yes.
And I'll let you go first on this one. What were your thoughts on it when you first saw it?
So, kind of like how I said with the last episode when we were reviewing Solo, this was actually a movie that I had a lot of fun with. But unlike Solo, this was actually a movie that I really did enjoy back in the day, even though it was like only 2 years ago, give or take. I still
Yeah.
remember enjoying it in the theater very much.
Yeah, me too. That's about how I felt about it when I first saw it. Though again, that's probably in part due to what I called with The Last Jedi the honeymoon phase of just having a new Star Wars movie, liking it because it was new. But once that honeymoon phase sort of wore off, and I saw it again in the theaters with you, and then saw it when it first came out on DVD, I realized that I did still enjoy it, even if it was an absolute mess of a movie. It is by far my favorite of the sequel trilogy, but there's still things about it that could be done better. So let's get right into that. And let's start with the biggest thing that this movie is known for, the fact that Palpatine returned. Now, the whole reason that Palpatine returned in this movie pretty much was because J.J. Abrams was left with no choice but to bring back Palpatine because, of course, Snoke was killed in Episode 8, and there was no big villain that could basically be the bigger villain than Kylo Ren. And Kylo Ren, no offense to that character or to Adam Driver, but he just basically didn't have it to be the big main villain for episode 9. So, of course, J.J. Abrams brought back Palpatine. And they weren't 100%, clear on how on how Palpatine came back in this movie because technically he blew up in Return of the Jedi twice. Once when he got thrown down the shaft, and then another time when the Death Star number 2 blew up. And yet somehow he's back in this movie. And I know that there's a book that says this, but the movie itself, it's not 100% clear on.
hmm
So, what did you think of Palpatine coming back for episode 9?
Well, I could honestly say that it was pretty much just awkward. I mean, you pretty much almost quoted the movie itself. Somehow Palpatine returned, and that was literally it. That's
That's
all we
right.
got from the movie. And so,
Yeah.
kind of like how you said with the novelization of the book, it does make things a little bit more clear on how he returned. But, even still, um at least for me personally, I wouldn't go out of my way to buy a book just to uncover that piece of information, and I feel like the movie should have delved into that. Heck, even if they wanted to break the tradition of having a trilogy and make it a quadrilogy, where episode 9 could have been the setup, and then episode 10, that we would call it, would be basically, okay, what are we going to do about this now that Palpatine is here?
Yeah.
If that
I
makes
could see
sense.
that because I remember in the novelization it mentioned that the body that Palpatine's spirit was in for Rise of Skywalker was not his original body. It was a clone.
Yes.
And I guess they were implying that the clone's body was not strong enough to contain Palpatine's dark spirit, hence why his body, especially his hands, look so screwed up like they are. But again, we
Yes.
don't get anything like that in the movie. The most we get was, like you said, what Poe said, somehow Palpatine returned. And then, of course, we get Mary. I know that's not his name in this movie, but
Yeah.
Mary saying it had to be dark science or cloning, secrets only the Sith knew,
Yeah.
which does not make sense because people know about the cloners on Camino. So
Hmm.
yeah. But that being said, though, I do think it was cool to see Ian McDiarmid playing the role of Palpatine again. He's always amazing to see in that role.
Yeah.
And when he finally got his body back, I thought that looked amazing. But
Yeah.
my biggest complaint with Palpatine was how he died. He died by again letting his own Force lightning get blasted back onto him. He's had
Yeah.
this happen to him twice before, once with Mace Windu, and then another time with Vader. And you would
Hmm.
think after those two times he'd learn that, oh crap, the lightning that I'm shooting is coming back and hitting me. I should probably stop doing this. And yet he just presses his attack stronger.
Yeah.
So how does that just does not seem very intelligent of Palpatine to do that.
Hmm.
But moving on away from Palpatine, and we'll talk a little bit more about that whole final scene a little bit later. Let's move on to Kylo. Now, I will fully admit, when I did my last Jedi review, I forgot to talk about Kylo Ren in that movie, and I guess it's kind of a happy accident that I forgot because really, Kylo Ren, even though he is my favorite character of the sequel trilogy, he was the most flip-floppish character of this whole trilogy, where he starts out in The Force Awakens wanting to be like Vader, but then in episode 8 he seemingly rejects wanting to be the next Vader when he destroys his mask. But then in this movie he's like, no, I do want to be the next Vader, and he starts meditating with Vader's destroyed helmet again, and he rebuilds his own helmet until he decides to turn good. But even still, even with all of that what's the word I'm looking for? Contradiction.
Hmm.
He's Adam Driver still did an amazing job as Kylo Ren throughout this entire trilogy. Like I said, I cannot imagine anyone other than Adam Driver playing Kylo Ren in this series.
Yeah. Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And I'll be the first one to admit it. And I actually had this thought before I joined the channel where when I first saw Kylo Ren, I figured, okay, he kind of looks like Revan from the Legends just because he's got the mask, he's got the hood, he's got some sort of saber. He just looks like Revan to me. And I thought, okay, this could be cool. But then,
Yeah,
of course, things changed in Last Jedi, like you said, where he was a bit more impulsive. He just wanted to impress his boss, you can say, because we could
he
all
wanted
relate
to
to that.
impress his boss until it came time to kill him.
Pretty much, yeah. But
But
when it
yeah,
came to the Rise of Skywalker, I would say he was done with much more justice, just because you can see that he was still conflicted about who he was, even though he was pretty much in denial that he was in conflict in the first place.
exactly. Yeah, like Ray said, he just could not get over what he did to Han Solo, and it ate him away from the inside. Basically, the guilt from that, as well as the intervention from his mother through the Force, as well
Mhm.
as I guess you could say Rey's faith in him, that's what ultimately won him back to the light side. And once he actually turned to the light side, arguably he became stronger. Like if you look at his fighting style with a lightsaber before he turned back to the light side versus after, he is a much faster and smoother fighter when he was
Yeah,
using Luke's lightsaber as a Jedi as opposed to his crossguard saber as a Sith. And maybe
yeah,
some of that has to do with the build of his crossguard saber not
yeah,
being
of course.
as, aerodynamic and such, and being more emotional and just focusing on more wild swings as opposed to more control. But you could tell that something had changed, not just in what side of the Force he decided to follow, but just something had changed in general in Kylo when he turned back to the light.
Yeah. All right, so what do we got next to review?
So next after this, let's talk about Rey. Now, like I said in my last video on Rey with Last Jedi, That movie was the movie that made me not like Rey that much because again, that was the movie where she officially became a Mary Sue because she, after only at the most a day's worth of training, I think on Octu with Luke, she's able to lift all those hundreds of heavy boulders where other Force users would have struggled to do that with the same amount of training.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in this movie, they go out of their way, and this is one of the many ways that Rise of Skywalker tries to fix Last Jedi. They go out of their way to show that Rey has had some training. And if I remember correctly, it's like a year apart between the end of Last Jedi and the beginning of Rise of Skywalker, and they
Mm-hmm.
show that during that time Rey had been training, Rey had been studying the ancient texts. So now it's at least somewhat justified that she can do all these amazing things now because she's had the practice. And
Yeah.
for me, even though she's not my favorite character, that did sort of rehabilitate Rey's image in my mind.
Yeah. And if you allow me to kind of play devil's advocate here, I'd say
Hmm.
that she wasn't exactly a Mary Sue throughout the trilogy, and I want to say that Rise of Skywalker reinforces this idea. And let me explain. So I would agree that a case could be made that she was a Mary Sue based on her power level. But according
Hmm.
to like Urban Dictionary or Merriam-Webster, Mary Sue describes a female, well, typically a character who basically has no flaws.
I'm gonna
So
look this up while you're doing this.
yeah, so to kind of
Keep
illustrate
talking.
that, it, we can probably consider Captain Marvel, well, as a Mary Sue, just because even though it's been a while since I've seen that movie, I remember that she really doesn't have any flaws that she recognizes needs to be fixed. But one
All right,
major
check this.
flaw that Ray had was her sense of who am I? Like she had no
Hmm.
idea who she was since birth.
All
So
right, so there
here's
is the
the
definition of Mary Sue right there. We're gonna read this word for word. A
mm-hmm,
Mary Sue is a character who is so perfect that he or she warps the world around them to display their perfection. It seems as though nothing in this universe except Mary Sue is even real, and is instead a plot device to make Mary Sue seem flawless and loved. A Mary Sue can destroy a piece of writing or media, since the character's existence will often forcibly make the world and people around them defy logic to simply display how amazingly radiant they are. The term is meant to describe any and all characters that seemingly warp reality to show display, simply to display their perfection. But some people do use terms such as Marty Sue or Gary Sue as a male nickname for a Mary Sue. It's important to know that in an attempt to make a character seem less Sue-ish, authors will often give their Mary Sue a flaw that is actually just a stale trait in disguise. This leads to many different subgenres of the Mary Sue, though all are just as boring and cliche as the original. So, applying what we just read there, I think that my opinion still stands on Rey as being a Mary Sue in The Last Jedi because, again, she was able to do all of that stuff with so little training, though her being a Mary Sue in The Rise of Skywalker, maybe not as much so. At least in this instance, she has the training, so she's able to somewhat justify being able to do all the stuff that she's able to do. Like, for example, do a backflip over Kylo Ren's TIE fighter and cut the wing off,
mm-hmm,
or do all those massive force jumps in her fight against Kylo Ren, and be able to, of course, expertly Jedi mind trick those stormtroopers. But even with all of that, there's just some stuff that she's able to do that I question. And this
mm-hmm,
is where we kind of go back to how Palpatine dies. Because if you remember, before Palpatine died, he was shooting his lightning at her, and she was just blocking it with a lightsaber with one arm. And earlier in the series, in episode 3, we see Mace Windu doing the same thing, except he has to use two hands to block the Force lightning instead of just one. And he's clearly struggling to do it. You hear him screaming in pain, yet
mm-hmm.
Rey is able to do it just like that. And that's still kind of Mary Sue-ish to me.
Yeah.
But even still, though, another thing to talk about with Rey, and another thing that they changed from The Last Jedi, is Rey is no longer a nobody. She is the granddaughter of Palpatine in this movie. And that kind of again goes back to explain a little bit of how she's so powerful, is because her grandfather was this great powerful Sith that was very strong in the dark side of the Force. And of course, as we know with Luke, if your father, or in this case grandfather, is strong in the Force, there's a pretty good chance you will be too. Not to mention,
Hmm. Hmm.
excuse me, not to mention they bring up that her and Kylo Ren are a dyad in the Force. And I'll be perfectly honest with you, I'm still not 100% clear as to what that even means. Does it mean that it's basically one spirit in the Force that's separated into two people and somehow they come together and become stronger?
Hmm. Well, the way I would understand it is if you are not of Christian faith or do not follow any religion, this is your heads up. But here's the way I would describe it: the Bible talks about what is known as the Holy Trinity, three that are
Yes.
one. We have the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Now, again, if you're
Yes.
non-religious, that's totally okay. I don't mean to be religious, but this is just to illustrate the point. We're
We're preaching,
basically
kids. We're speaking off what we know.
where basically these three parts of what we call God, it is still the same God, but they're different identities. They're separate yet the same. They're same yet the separate, if that makes any sort of sense.
Okay, okay, I get it now. So it kind of is what I was saying, where it is one spirit in the Force, but it is in two separate autonomous people.
Yes.
But yet when they come together, as seen when Palpatine does that Force drain move on them, it's so powerful that it's able to restore Palpatine's body to being whole again, which I do think
Yeah.
was kind of cool.
Yeah. Which now that I think
Now,
about it, that's something I totally don't get, but that's honestly okay.
well, Palpatine does kind of say it in the movie itself that the power of the dyad is like life itself. So, if anything, he was replenishing his life, hence why his hands were restored from being so screwed up.
Okay, I guess that makes sense.
Now, speaking of that, or speaking kind of going in a similar vein, another thing that I don't think quite makes Rey a Mary Sue, but it's something that I feel like was introduced a little bit too late in the game as far as Star Wars goes: force healing. And this is a point that a lot of people have brought up before. Personally, I do not mind the idea of a Jedi being able to heal wounds like that, using the Force. But where was it when Qui-Gon Jinn was dying and Obi-Wan could have used Force healing to heal him? Where was
Hmm.
it when Obi-Wan could have healed Anakin after burning him on Mustafar? And where was it when Anakin could have saved his mother?
Hmm.
Because I'm guessing this is something that she learned from the ancient Jedi texts.
Hmm.
So how could the Jedi have not known about this ability, or known about these ancient Jedi texts that have this ability?
Well, I would honestly consider that maybe the sort of forceability was possibly in the restricted section where the council members were, where that's a possible thing. I'm not saying it's canon or anything, I'm saying it's possible. And then in regards
Okay.
to Obi-Wan, he's actually one of the known Jedi that's had to have the lowest M count, or like one of the lowest M counts. So
Yes, that's
there's
right.
certain
That's
there's
right.
certain things that Jedi can't do alike. So say for example, Cal Kestis, he has what's called psychometry. He touches an object,
Yes.
senses it, and then he can see visions of what it's been through. However,
Ray
other
can do that
Jedi,
too.
yeah, Rey can do that too. However, other Jedi can't really do the same thing. It's really just based off of how many midichlorians, and yes, we're getting to those lovely midichlorians again. And
I've
it's
already
based
said
on
enough
like,
about this on this channel.
and so, anyways, it really just depends on like how powerful you are as an individual. Because, like I said, not every Jedi is made the same.
Okay. So you think that force healing was unique to just Rey and Ben? That's like basically their special force talent, for lack of a better term, and they both have it because they're part of the force dyad?
It's entirely possible, I will say. Now, if we were
Okay.
to get into the Mandalorian spoilers ahead, the Baby Yoda or Grogu also possesses the
That's
force
right.
healing ability.
I forgot about that. I forgot about that.
And so
So,
it does make you think, like, what's really going on here with this force healing thing? Like, it makes sense in context with the dyad, but if we were to look at Grogu using it at the penultimate episode of season one, then it makes you think, okay, well, what's really going on here?
yeah. Like I said, I have no issue with the idea of force healing in general. I just feel like it's been introduced way too late in the game, and it raises a whole bunch of, just like the Holdo maneuver, it raises a whole bunch of questions of why didn't they do this before. Now, changing topics again, let's talk about Leia. Now, as we all know, Carrie Fisher tragically passed away in 2016 before The Last Jedi released. Now, she had already filmed all her scenes for The Last Jedi, thankfully, but they wanted to have her in Rise of Skywalker, and using a CGI double like they had done with young Princess Leia and Tarkin in Rogue One, that was out of the question because her family said no. So they basically, from what I understand, used unused footage of Leia from The Force Awakens and put it in the movie, and I guess somehow redubbed over her lines. And yet they do all of this, and it's Leia's turn to be the original character that unfortunately dies in this movie. And again, it's not 100% clear exactly what kills her. Was it the fact that she was trying so hard to reach through the force to reach her son and convince him to turn from the dark side? Was that what killed her? Or was it something else?
Hmm. Well, this is actually something that Master Paul and I had previously talked about, even before there was like a script or a trailer for episode 9. And I told him that if Leia was to go out, they need to make her go out with style, basically. They need to pay some sort of respect to her and make her death so monumental to the story that it changes everything had she not died,
Right.
basically. And I do
And
feel like that and I
when
do
we had
feel
that
like
conversation, oh, go ahead, go ahead.
yeah, and I do feel like that Rise of Skywalker or did that very well. Just considering that they couldn't film a whole lot of new scenes with Leia because, like you said, they couldn't do a CGI body double.
Right. Nor were they going to recast her because, let's face it, Carrie Fisher is Princess Leia, just like Mark Hamill is Luke Skywalker and Harrison Ford is Han Solo. Sorry, Alden Ehrenreich.
Yeah.
But yeah, I see what you mean by that. Though I remember when we first had that conversation, I had envisioned something very much different. Like I envisioned her basically, in a way, kind of doing something similar to the Holdo maneuver, but not actually the Holdo maneuver, where she just drives a ship right into another ship to help, I guess, sacrifice herself to save the day. But instead, we get her reaching through the Force to contact her son, and I'm guessing the effort of that, unfortunately, killing her. So I can certainly see where you're at, but I do think there could have been other better ways to achieve the same result. Now, moving on to the next character, let's talk about Luke. Now, there's not much really to say here because, of course, Luke died in the Last
Mhm.
Jedi, so all he can do is be a Force ghost here. But this is another area where J.J. Abrams clearly tried to change what the Last Jedi had said about Luke, because, and probably the most blatant one, because of course Rey is on Octu. She's built a big fire out of Kylo Ren's TIE fighter, planning to isolate herself there. She goes to throw the lightsaber, Luke's lightsaber, into the fire, but Luke catches it and says, "A Jedi's weapon deserves more respect." And then later on admits that he was wrong to isolate himself on Octu like that, that it was fear that kept him here. So my question is, about what do you think about that, basically the blatant changes that they did to Luke like that? Do you like them, or would you have preferred that they kept that they stayed the course?
Well, I do think it was necessary to change them because when we were watching Last Jedi and saw what Luke was living, so far as how he was living his life, we can remember that's not the Luke that I remember seeing, in our case, on DVD so many times, or even some older fans who may say, yeah, that's not the Luke that I remember seeing in theaters. I do feel it was necessary
Right.
to pretty much preserve who Luke was, and pretty much The Last Jedi had butchered that. So the Rise of Skywalker attempted to pretty much reinforce that Luke was meant to be like this hopeful figure, if you will. And I do think that it
Right.
was executed well, given what the previous movie had done, and given how much
Agreed.
screen time that Luke actually had.
And not to mention, it was also cool to see Luke finally successfully lift his X-wing out of the water. Though that does raise a question, and this is kind of something that popped up in The Last Jedi also. If
Hmm.
Force ghosts can physically interact with the physical world, why don't they just go fight the battle on Exegol instead of all the resistance and Rey, going there risking their lives?
Hmm. You know, this honestly reminds me of another YouTube channel I did, not a YouTube channel that I watched. It's called Film Theory. Shoutouts to Matt Pack and all the people
Yes.
over there, where basically he talks about this idea of location, location, location. So
Mm-hmm.
basically, he talks about how, well, on Exegol is a very good location if you are a Sith. It's full of dark side energy,
Oh, I
if you think about
gotcha.
it like that. And then Octu, on
Gotcha.
the other hand, is a good location of light side energy, where Jedi would thrive
Okay,
there. So
I gotcha.
it's kind of like how on Dagobah, if we were to look at it that way, we see Luke going into this area, and Yoda says, "Over there is the dark side," or he basically describes the dark side in that specific area in which
A,
Luke.
dom- a domain of evil it is.
Exactly.
Yes. Okay, that makes sense then. So, moving on now from that, let's talk about Lando. And again, really not much to say here other than it was nice to see Billy D. Williams come back in the role. And it was nice that we were specifically getting classic Lando and not the Donald Glover Lando that was in love with a droid.
Yeah, that's a little sus.
Yes, it is. And then other characters to talk about: Finn and Poe. This out of all of the three really was Ray's movie. Finn and Poe, more so than the last two movies, were just kind of along for the ride on this one. The most
Hmm.
that they do is take part in the fight on Exegol, but I still think that John Boyega and Oscar Isaac did a good job of their roles respectively, and it was good to see Finn and Poe actually take charge of the resistance and actually lead the attack on Exegol. And then moving on from that, really quick, talking about General Hux, what do you think of the fact that he ended up being a spy for the resistance?
Mm, you know, I can honestly say I really don't know how to think about this, just because he's one of those characters that was written so that we hate him. Like, no matter what good he
Yes,
does, or no matter what he looks like, you just, he just has a very punchable face, if you know what I mean.
he does.
Whereas,
He does.
whereas Kylo, even though he's a villain, we're supposed to sympathize with him, not just because he's a Skywalker, but because you can tell that he's human. Whereas General Hux, on the other hand, you just want to beat his face in.
Yeah. Though I will also say that Hux's character, he was supposed to be taken seriously in The Force Awakens, and for the most part was, with the exception of that one speech that he did on Starkiller Base that may remind you of, well, someone else from real life, we'll say. But then in Last Jedi, and especially in this movie, he just becomes this sniveling little sidekick to Kylo Ren and is ultimately just, shot like it's nothing once he's found out to be the spy. And then basically
Mm,
taken, and his place is taken by General Pride, who arguably was the character that General Hux was supposed to be, that J.J. Abrams intended him to be from The Force Awakens.
yeah.
Which again, General Pride, I think he did great, though he's no Grand Moff Tarkin.
Hmm.
And then, just touching on this really quick, it was also really cool seeing Chewie finally get his medal after getting snubbed from it or getting forgotten in A New Hope. R2, of course, was good as always, so was BB 8. C3PO. This is probably the movie that he gets the most involved in, arguably more so than even A New Hope, because he's the one that has to get his memory wiped so that they know where to go to find the second Wayfinder. So
Yeah.
how do you think that they did with C3PO in this movie?
Yeah. I want to say that I don't know how to describe it. He's like that one friend that everyone just kind of forgets about, but then once he actually starts getting very serious, you start paying attention to him because that's pretty
Mhm.
much how he was throughout the movie. Everyone just kind of pushed him over to the side, said like "shut up, 3PO," and then as soon as he says, "I'm taking one last look at my friends," that was pretty much like the most closure that we would get from C3PO. And yes, he got
Right.
his memory back and he still lived to tell the tale, but even still, when thinking about that, he's pretty much saying, you know what? This our story is going to end. My story is going to end soon.
Yeah. And I think you could also interpret him saying that because all you see is C3PO looking right at the camera when he says that line. You could argue that he was breaking the fourth wall and saying that to the audience because think about it. Comparatively, he's been around Luke, Han, and Leia much longer than he has Ray, Poe, and Finn. So wouldn't it make more sense for him to say taking one last look at my friends with Luke, Han, and Leia instead of Ray, Finn, and Poe? Just for that extra bit of, hit you right in the feels?
Hmm.
Yeah. But since that can't happen now, I think the closest thing that we were getting is probably that C3PO was looking directly down the camera at the audience and saying, taking one last look at my friends that have been here with me since 1977, all the way through well, Rogue One counts 10 movies that he's been in. And then finally, wrapping up this video, let's talk a little bit about how we kind of talked about this a little bit before, but let's really dive into all of the changes that J.J. Abrams made to this movie to try and fix what happened with The Last Jedi. Because it's no secret that The Last Jedi, as I have said before, divided the fan base beyond anything that even the prequels could ever hope to do. And Disney and Lucasfilm know this. And so they wanted to try and bring back the fans that lost interest after Last Jedi and after Solo. And so they went out of their way in a lot of places to fix what Last Jedi had broken. For example, making Luke actually Luke Skywalker, albeit a Force ghost, fixing Kylo Ren's helmet, fixing Rey's. I'm not gonna. Well, I guess it's Rey's lightsaber since she's the one that used it. It's still Anakin's lightsaber to me. Fixing that lightsaber, um, making Rey not a nobody. She's a Palpatine now. And while I certainly applaud the effort to try and win back those fans, J.J. Abrams at the same time was clearly still trying to pick up where he left off with his own story after the end of episode 7, instead of really going off the end of episode 8. And I have said this before in private conversations, both with you and some of our coworkers, that ideally, the sequel trilogy, if we were going to get what we got, should have been episode 7 as we got it, but then flesh out episode 9 a little bit more and split it into 2 movies and make the first half episode 8. So I would propose that, even in spite of the changes that J.J. Abrams tried to do to the story to get it back on course, it arguably made an even bigger mess and was even more evidence that there was no plan for the sequel trilogy. What do you think?
Yeah, I want to say that it's especially since Kathleen Kennedy was in charge, I feel like that she just let the directors do what they wanted, which isn't
Mhm.
entirely bad per se, but it does show like a lack of plan. Whereas George Lucas, even though we can say that he had a lot of changes and especially right around episode 5, where not even it was either like the second or third script where Darth Vader officially became the father. Like he had
Right.
some changes of his own, and so we can't say that without saying, yeah, Lucas himself had some problems. However, once he
Exactly.
actually solved his problems, and then come the prequel trilogy, he you can tell that his vision was clear. Tell a story about a boy who becomes basically the ruler of the galaxy under an emperor, of course.
Right. And even though George Lucas did not direct episodes 5 and 6, he was still there on set as basically the one with the map for where the story was going to go, and the directors were basically just there to figure out how to get there from the movie making perspective. And that's what should have happened with this sequel trilogy. There should have been one story, and it's each director's job to figure out how to get that story, how to basically get the story from point A to point B from a movie making perspective. And I think I'm going to go ahead and announce this now, but me and Michael have been in talks, and we have decided that the big project that we want to do with this channel is we would like to do our own rewrite of the sequel trilogy, just to show what could have been if the sequel trilogy had been planned out all the way through all 3 movies, and basically give our own interpretation of what could have happened. Now,
Yeah,
you're still going to see a lot of the same familiar characters from the real sequel trilogy. There will still be Rey, there will still be Finn, Poe, Luke, Han, Leia, Ben Solo, Kylo Ren. I said those 2 separately on purpose. But we're basically going to give those characters something different to do and change their character enough to fit their new role. So
yeah,
stay tuned for that. We're still very much in the brainstorming process of what this trilogy is going to look like and still planning out how exactly we're going to do it. But that is what we ultimately want to do with this channel, is put forth our own version of what might have happened after episode 6. So that's where we're going to end the video now. Again, thank you for watching this very long video.
yeah.
Click like and subscribe if you haven't already. And don't forget to tune in tomorrow, Sunday at 5 p.m., where we will be having a live stream where we will be A, talking about the sequel trilogy as a whole, and B, we will also be giving our thoughts on the latest episode of The Bad Batch. So, and also, since Michael is new on the channel, we'll also use tomorrow's live stream for him to formally introduce himself to the channel and sort of tell his story of growing up as a Star Wars fan. Spoiler alert, it's probably going to be very similar to mine since we're brothers. So, again, thank you guys for watching this video, and we will see you guys next time. Thank you very much.
Bye bye.